Hey everyone, this is Wyatt Jackson here. You're listening to Adventures into Odyssey. Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? Well, I hope you're all doing great, and I know I'm doing okay with the whole shutdown. But I mean, it's warm and sunny here, so I'm happy. Anyway, today I'm very happy while recording this because I'm not recording Prisoners of Fear. I got very tired of those episodes, and so I'm happy that I'm done that, and I'm happy to move on from Africa. So anyway, today I'm going to be discussing episode 584. Dead Ends. And, so this is the first episode, this is the second episode of the Leonard Meltsner Saga that takes place in Odyssey. All of Prisoners of Fear, parts 1, 2, and 3 did not take place in Odyssey. This one does. Yeah. And before I get into the episode, I just want to say that I really want a guest on a few times, I really think this podcast would be so much better if I had a co-host on. But right now, it's kind of impossible. So, oh well. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So this is episode 584, Dead Ends, written and directed by Marshall Younger. And it first aired February 4th in 2006, which is a few years after, a little after Prisoners of Fear. It's, in the episode A Date with Dad, which is the album right after the other one, Lost and Found. So we're pretty much after that, and I appreciate the fact that they didn't have us do a blackguard wait style, because I know I like I don't like them dragging it out long. I like having a few albums with really intense stuff and not have a blackguard situation, because with blackguard it was you had album 5, Daring Deeds, Sinister Schemes, and then you had album 25, Darkness Before Dawn, and then you had a few fragments of blackguard in between there, like Waylaid in the Windy City and A Name Not a Number and Tom for Mayor. But I just appreciate that they keep this saga, except for the first episode. But I mean, I guess the first episode, Last in a Long Line, wasn't really part of it. It's just kind of background with kind of Hiram Meltsner stuff, so. Oh well, that's not really part of the saga, and it doesn't really contribute much to the saga, but I reviewed it. And by the way, I'm not going to be reviewing A New Era, parts 1, 2, and 3, because I don't really like those episodes. I'll get into it later on why I don't particularly care for them, but yeah, for now, let's just get into this episode. So, as I already said, it first aired February 4th, 2006. And it's interesting because it's the first episode of the series to start with a Chris refresher, if you will. And so this refresher includes kind of a summary of Last in a Long Line and Prisoners of Fear. And it's interesting that it included Last in a Long Line, because that was like in album 10, and we're like in album 45 now, so it goes back quite a ways, to say the least. But anyway, we get summary of Last in the Long Line and Prisoners of Fear. And I was going to say, this is the first episode which is clearly the Leonard Meltsner Saga. And the other episodes I've covered before this weren't really. They're just kind of interesting episodes. But this is definitive Leonard Meltsner Saga. And so, yeah, that's great. I'm going to briefly be discussing casting in this episode. So I'm not going to say the voice actors, because before I had some trouble pronouncing. So I'll just say, the characters, not casting, characters. So we have Eugene Meltsner and Katrina. We have Whit. We have Martin from the appropriately named Around the World missions. We have, who's presumably Leonard Meltsner, his first appearance in the show. And we have the unnamed homeless shelter man. And we have Mr. and Mrs. Burnett. So it's a pretty small cast. But yeah, it seems to work fine. So, with that out of the way, let us roll the promo.
Searching for his father has Eugene going in circles.
So in essence,
I'm right back where I started.
And so he visits the foster home where he grew up in search of a new clue.
I made your favorite.
Well, what would that be?
Your favorite organic barley vegetable soup.
Find out if the search for Eugene's father will get beyond all the dead ends on the next Adventures in Odyssey.
Okay. We've had some weird promos, but this is definitely the weirdest. I mean, first of all, the music in the background. There was like 4 different tracks. And at the end, like the outro, you had a 7-second outro, but it changed. Like, what? It changed halfway in the outro into really weird, happy style music? What was this supposed to be? Okay, not the greatest intro. I hope next one will be better. And then, it says, will Eugene get past the dead ends in the intro? Eugene's not, like, he says it, that his goal when he went there, he was trying to learn stuff about his father, but he also wanted to see if he was a good child or not. Like, it's not about just his father. And, yeah. It's not the greatest promo. The music is really weird. It changes 4 times if you didn't notice. Anyway. Okay. With the promo out of the way, let's get into the episode here. So, the first scene... So, let's get into the scenes. So, the first scene is at Eugene's home, and he's presumably on the telephone. And this is kind of a humorous scene, and I'll get into it. And so, Eugene says, "Hello, bonjour, do you speak English?" And he's like, "Ah." And so, Eugene's calling someone named Jacques Meltsner. You have to say that noir, which is black in French, which is funny. So it's Meltsner. And so Eugene's calling this guy, and he found his name and number on the internet and thought it might be related to Meltsner. And then he proceeds to ask this poor guy, like, a whole bunch of questions about his real father. And then Eugene's like, oh, that's interesting. And then there's like a few more seconds of conversation before he hangs up. And it's a total dead end. And Katrina comes in and she's like, "What are you doing, Eugene?" And Eugene's like, "Oh, I'm just calling this guy." And she's like, Eugene's like, "I'm just calling Jacques Meltsner." And she's like, "What?" And presumably this guy's in France, because he later says it was a long distance call. So Eugene's calling a guy somewhere in France. Oh. And apparently this guy's really chatty and, and all that, but what? Eugene, it's just kind of a funny thing. So, Eugene is quite desperate. He's tried all the leads he can think of, and like he's just racking his brain. And I presume if this is like modern day, he'd be like, "Siri, CL results for Leonard Meltsner," or something like that. I don't know. Funny. So Eugene's pretty desperate, and Katrina just like is begging him to tell Mr. Whitaker, and Eugene's like, no, and all that. But then Eugene finally, reluctantly, agrees to tell Whit. And so then we go straight to Whit's End. And so Eugene is telling Whit, and all his efforts have basically been completely fruitless to find his father. And Whit is so nice in this episode. Like, he's like, "Oh, of course, Eugene. Oh, I'll do whatever I can to help you find him." And Eugene's like so happy. And so then Whit asks for like, "Have you discovered anything?" And he's like, "Well, I have my facts, and it's from the appropriately named Around the World missions." And whenever this is coming up, I'm always going to call it appropriately named, because that is such a fake missions board. Like, not fake as in like a bad company, but fake as in like an audio drama company. Around the World missions. It's such a And so the fax has the initials LM, presumably Leonard Meltsner. And then Eugene says, strange that my father specifically mentioned on the fax, for Eugene Meltsner. Okay, Eugene, that should be your first clue that the fax isn't what it seemed like. But we'll get into that in a few scenes ahead. And I also wrote down that it's funny that it's fax, because this aired in 2006. And I think faxes were still used kind of around 2006. But that's kind of the era where cell phones started to become more better. I don't know. Like we have a printer that we bought like 2010. It still kind of works, and it has a fax setting, but it's never been used once. So I don't know. It's a completely different era, and it's kind of funny. And there's another comment made by Whit later that is so old school, something about the internet. I wrote it down. It's a little later. But anyway, getting on a tangent here. So, anyway, that's kind of the whole scene. Eugene told Whit. He told Whit about the fax, and Whit's like, well, I'll look into it. And Eugene's like, yay, okay, cool. And so then we go to Eugene in his garage. And Eugene is doing a chemistry experiment, and it's supposed to clean laundry more efficiently. And Katrina comes in, and she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, it's supposed to help laundry clean more efficiently. I last tried it when I was 6 years old, which, whoa, like, did his father just leave? How? We find out that this experiment he did when he was 6 years old literally burned through a bathtub. Like, whoa, okay. This was some serious stuff Eugene was able to get his hands on when he was 6. Like, okay. Okay. Well, whatever. I think when I was 6, I was like, I don't know, kindergarten, preschool, maybe. Okay. This also brings up an interesting point about Eugene's childhood. Like, even if he's a genius, we later in a later episode, I think it's in an earlier episode, we found out that he had like a chalkboard in his crib for doing his like calculus, but like, well, like, what? Okay, even if you're somehow a child prodigy and like you can do calculus like snap, you still have to learn it. And I guarantee that his father didn't teach him calculus when he was like a baby in his crib. Like, what? This doesn't, like, he just somehow knew how to like find chemicals when he was like in kindergarten and create an acidic compound that ate. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense at all. But okay, whatever. So he then tells Katrina that his father was frequently cleaning up his failed attempts. And Eugene is just very happy right now to hand over his burden to Whit. And then Katrina tells him that maybe he's going on this the wrong way. She says if his father wants to find him, he'll find him. And Katrina Eugene just completely takes that the wrong way. And he's like, are you saying my father doesn't want to find me? And Eugene's like, no. It's like, Eugene, like, your father might not know that you're alive, and da-da-da-da-da, and they have it starts to get heated a little, and then Eugene's experiment boils over and starts corroding the table, and it's great sound engineering. I don't usually know sound engineering, but it is great sound engineering how they did this. I don't know how. Maybe they corroded a table to get that sound engineering, and then they're both freaking out, like, trying to get the garden hose, and da-da-da-da-da. And then it's all put out, and Katrina's like, your father must have been a patient man. And then Eugene says, indeed. And this is a line where I feel it could go both ways. Like, what happens if Eugene's like, Katrina? Because Eugene later, when Eugene's with the Burnett's a bit later, he later almost like freaks out when they start teasing him. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like, what happens if Eugene would like takes that the wrong way? But he doesn't seem to take it the wrong the wrong way, I guess. But anyway, then we go to a fairly long scene. I have a lot of notes in this scene because part of it, in my opinion, does not make sense. And maybe that's just because I got confused on the plot. So we're in Whit's office, and Eugene has just opened the door, and Whit's on the phone. And surprise, surprise, it's Martin from the appropriately named Around the World Missions, which is the best mission company name ever that I don't think any mission company is actually named because it's just too generic. But it's a great name for Odyssey. Around the World Missions. Same with Hand Up, actually. Hand Up's a great name, too. Anyway, off on that tangent. So Whit's talking to Martin. And then, so Eugene starts talking to Martin, and Martin tells him that he was the one who authorized sending Eugene and Katrina to Africa. And he wrote for Eugene Meltsner on the fax. But Eugene's like, what? What? Like, wait a minute, what? The handwriting wasn't the same. And Whit's like, no, it's not the same. Because you see, I looked at it closer and I found out that it was slightly different. The thing is, earlier in this episode, I don't think I mentioned it, but Eugene says that he's studied this fax like over and over. How could he have not noticed it? Because LM is in his father's hands, but the rest in his father's handwriting, but the rest apparently was. And yeah, so his father actually didn't write for Eugene Meltsner on the fax. That was Martin. And then Eugene kind of says, yeah, but it's the Ashantis. I mean, that's the area where my father was in. And then Martin says, well, the Ashantis. Yeah, true, but like we were planning on sending someone to the Ashantis like anyway. Like it wouldn't have mattered because they were already on our needs list. And so he didn't know that LM was his father, but he just randomly like found this fax, presumably by his father. And then okay, so here's how it, because when I first heard this, I was super confused. So his father, Leonard Meltsner, writes this fax for someone to go to the Ashantis, and then he sends it to the appropriately named Around the World Missions. And so apparently they've gotten a lot of these faxes for the Ashantis, like someone goes out, and so they just see Leonard's fax, and they're like, okay, we'll use this one. And so then Martin, he goes and he's like, well, we need someone with computer expertise to program the tower and build it and all that. And so he goes to Eugene and he writes for Eugene on the fax already written by Leonard Meltsner. And then he sends it off. So, yeah. And then Eugene starts flipping out. And this is where I have all my problems with Eugene. And I'll explain. And so then Eugene's like, so my father hasn't been trying to communicate with me after all? He's like, no, I'm right back to where I started. And Whit's like, yeah, but you know he's alive because you used to think he was dead. And then, okay, this is where I start having all my problems with Eugene. He starts getting super emotional, and Whit asked him, like, well, let's think about this. Like, what would you do if you were in his shoes? And then Eugene has the worst response. He just says, what would I do? I'd try to find my lost son who I haven't seen in 20 years. And he's like yelling. He's like angry, obviously angry. Good voice acting on Will Ryan's part, but like, okay, like I get it, but it's not a great image on Eugene because literally he doesn't know any of the circumstances here. He's just making a huge assumption about his father. Eugene doesn't know anything. Like his father might think he's dead, which we later find out in the saga that his father does think he died in a train crash, which I'll cover later. But Eugene, and then yeah, and then so let me go back. Eugene says, like, I'd try to find him if I were in his shoes. I'd try to find his son. And which, like, well, he might not have good internet access, which good point, Wit. If you're in Africa, you might not have internet access or whatever. And then Eugene's like, well, virtually everyone uses the internet. And then Wit says my favorite line in the entire episode. Well, not everyone uses the internet. Lol. That comment has become so it's just like the fax machine. That comment has become so outdated as virtually everyone I know uses the internet, especially in this time period right now. It's just kind of funny to see, like, old versus new. Well, not everyone uses the internet. And Eugene's like, well, I'm on the internet, so my father should be on the internet. Eugene, that's not how it works. Like, that's not how it works. And he should be like, because his father was literally held captive for 20 years, and then he watched his mother die, and then he escaped. They think he's dead. He somehow got back to America. So, yeah, he's not just going to be like, I'm going to set up I don't know, what was Facebook? Was Facebook around? Were any social media platforms around in 2006? Okay, I need to know this. I'll get back to you in a sec. Oh, Facebook was created in 2004. So, I imagine it was a lot smaller than it is now, but okay, I could presume Eugene has Facebook, like some kind of social media account. Now I know in Odyssey they use FaceBase, which is just a complete, funny thing, how to avoid it's like Facebook, but not. But the funny thing is all the teenagers use it, which almost no teenager I know uses Facebook. Complete tangent. So, Eugene is on the internet. He might be on Facebook. And apparently with just 3 or 4 clicks, you can find him. Whoa. Okay. Sure, whatever. Maybe Eugene Meltsner Odyssey, USA. I don't know. So Eugene comes to such a wrong conclusion that his father doesn't want to see him anymore. Eugene, you literally have no idea that your father thinks that. Like, your father was just held captive for 20 years. If I were you, I'd be like, okay, my dad's probably keeping a low profile because he just, like, this American who kind of is like the Lord of the Wolves, like, Eugene, you need to think of the bigger picture here. Don't assume stuff because there's a lot of stuff going on that you know nothing about. Okay, that's my frustration with Eugene this episode. So he comes to a bad conclusion. Wit tries to reason with Eugene, but he just cannot. And Eugene is just so frustrating in this episode. Like, he just doesn't even consider the possibility that his father doesn't know he's alive. Because he hadn't seen him in literally 20 years. And we later find out that he thinks he died in a train crash, which the Burnetts saved him from. I'll come to that in a future episode. Eugene. It's just like Bernard in the first... What's it? Yeah, it's just like Bernard in that one. But, okay, whatever. I gotta get past this. So then we go to the next scene. A very, very short scene. So it's in Eugene's home. And Eugene is very distraught. He's like, my father doesn't want to see me. He doesn't like me. And so Eugene's in the car on like his driveway or something, leaving for the Burnett's home. And Katrina comes out. She's like, Eugene, what happened? And she tries to talk. And Eugene's like, I can't talk right now. I'm going to the Burnetts. And he just wants to talk about his childhood. And Katrina's quite unsure about this whole situation. But Eugene like completely reassures her. And then he just drives off. Well, no. He's like, it'll be okay. I called them. They're okay with me coming over. Eugene's like, I'm not sure about this. And Eugene's like, bye. And then he just kind of drives off, which is funny. He's like, it's okay, Katrina. Bye. Whew. Drives off. Okay. So then we go to a really good scene, in my opinion. The Burnett's home. So he's at the door, and then his foster parents open the door, and there's like the common greeting, like, oh, we missed you. Oh, it's so good to see you again. And this is interesting because they're like, oh, you drive a Pontiac. And Eugene's like, yeah, I drive a Pontiac. And then the Burnetts are like, oh, well, we hit our vehicle because, when you were younger, you hated vehicles because you thought their exhaust fumes were harmful to the environment. Which, oh, okay. That's actually quite funny. So apparently when he was like with them, he just hated vehicles so much. I'm just getting flashbacks to like the Burnett's having like a Volkswagen TDI Jetta, and then when that whole thing comes out, I don't know. It sounds funny. And so Eugene's kind of embarrassed, and then she's like, "Yeah, and I made you your favorite meal." He's like, "Organic barley soup with a side of celery sticks," and Eugene's like, "Oh, yeah, cool, thanks." And then Mr. Burnett's like, "Yeah, I remember when you ordered that at Burger Barn." And then she's like, "I set the thermostat to 68 degrees because that was your favorite temperature when you were 10. I just think we need a young Eugene series here. Like, that would be so funny, having a young Eugene series. Can you imagine that? Just think about it. Eugene is like, what would young Eugene sound like? Could Will Ryan pull off a young voice? Maybe. I don't know. That would be funny, though. Adventures in Odyssey team, there's your new project. Young Eugene. So anyway, so she goes into the kitchen to get the food ready, and then Eugene and Mr. Burnett sit down, and it is such an awkward conversation, but it is so good how they do it. Like, both the voice actors are amazing. And then Mr. Burnett he's like, "Yeah, you read the Times," or da-da-da-da, and Eugene's like, "No." Silence. And then he's like, "So how's that wife of yours being to you?" He's like, "Great." Silence. And then he's like, "Well, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to your wedding, but I had that operation." And then Eugene says such a funny line. He says, "Well, your ears look very similar now." And he's like, "Thanks." Which, whoa, what happened to his ears? But it's just kind of a funny line, and I'm glad they put it in. Like, "Well, what happened to your ears?" Like, your ears look very similar now. So, and then Mr. Burnett asks if Katrina is normal. And Eugene's like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "Well, just like you." And Eugene is like starting to get really tense. And then he's like, "Well, you could try to fix my DVD player." And I just have to say, I'm really glad Mr. Burnett didn't say VCR, because you already made two dated references. We don't need a third one, because they already made the reference to not everyone using the internet and fax machines. We don't need VCRs. Like, I still use a DVD player. You know, my brother and sister watch lots of VeggieTales on it, and lots of other stuff. Okay, so Eugene doesn't really want to, and he's like, "Oh, come on." He's like, "I don't have the tools for repairing your DVD player." And Mrs. Burnett's like, "Hey, stop harassing the boy," or something like that. And then Mr. Burnett, I originally thought he kind of went off the deep end a bit, but yeah. He says, and I quote, "We had to eat barley and watch our grandma for 10 years. He's like, "Oh, come on, I can get some cheap labor because we had to do all this." And then Eugene's like, "What?" And he's like, "I'm kidding, Eugene." And then he says he kids because he loves, which, okay, I guess so. It just kind of sounded like at first, like an insult, but okay, whatever. And so then we go, the next scene is still on the Burnett's dinner table in the Burnett's home. And Eugene's he's told them the situation with his father, and they apparently never knew his father, which, yeah, I guess not. And then they realize that they have a few of his boxes up in the attic, which might contain some papers with like the adoption and all that. And then Mr. Burnett's like, "Oh, I may have thrown them away." And so they go upstairs. And then you go to a commercial break and come back. And this is just like, this is another point in the episode where I'm like, you didn't need to do that. Mr. Burnett's like, "Oh, I may have thrown them away." And Eugene's like, "What?" He's like, "Well, I needed to make room for my, I don't know, exercise machines." And they go upstairs, and then there's the commercial break. So they're trying to create like he's like, "Oh no, will Eugene recapture his papers, or are they gone forever because Mr. Burnett threw them? It's like, you don't need to do that. Just have them go upstairs. I don't know. If you're going to make it suspenseful, make it very suspenseful, or just don't at all. I don't like these. I don't know. Oh, well, whatever. I have to get past this. So they're in the Burnett's attic, and Eugene's like, oh, there's the boxes. Mr. Burnett's like, oh, good. So I didn't throw them out. Eugene, he's looking through the boxes, and he finds all its trophies. And then he's like, oh, but I'm missing one from one year. And Mr. Bennett's like, oh, yeah, because we didn't let you go that year. And Eugene's like, why not? He's like, well, you didn't do your chores, and we had that rule that, you don't do if you don't do chores on the weekday, you can't go out on the weekends. And she's like, oh, yeah, I forgot. And Mrs. Burnett's like, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But then he's like, no, it's good. You discipline me, which I think is good. And I wrote down here that they seem like very good foster parents. Yeah. And then Mr. Burnett says that they thought it was more important for Eugene to learn responsibility than for him to earn another trophy. Which is, that is a very good lesson to learn. And kudos to the Burnetts for teaching Eugene all this, because they seem like very good foster parents. And then Eugene finds a soap dish and Eugene's like, oh, wow. Because apparently this was in the bathtub that he destroyed when he was a child. Wait a sec. Did I mention the bathtub? Oh, I didn't mention the bathtub, I don't think. Sick. Okay, I'll just... When Eugene is in his garage, he's doing this chemical experiment, and he says that he did it in the bathtub of his old house, and it corroded the bathtub and went down into his father, the basement, and then his father had to fix it, and it cost a lot of money. I don't think I mentioned that. I'm really sorry. But apparently this is the soap dish that sat in that bathtub, and Leonard Meltsner kept it because he was very proud. It was on his desk. And there was an inscription which I wrote down. Created by Eugene, son of Lenny, as a necessary casualty to the pursuit of knowledge. Which is, cute. Very nice. And so then Eugene kind of realizes that his father wasn't mad at him for corroding the bathtub, because he considered it a valuable learning experience for Eugene. And it's a nice way to end the night, and Eugene has to go now. And he tells them that he found out some wonderful things about both of them, and he thanks them, and then he goes. Oh, and he takes all the boxes too. And Mr. Bennett's like, yeah, I can get that treadmill up here now, which is funny. Also, that would be a cool workout room, an attic. But anyway, I'm not going to get on another tangent. So then we go to the second last scene, Wit's End. And I just have it down here that the bell door, the little ding. And we always get that at Wit's End. It's just kind of subconsciously in my head. When you hear the bell, it's like, oh, it's in Wit's End. Huh, okay. So just kind of a small thing. And so Wit's there, and he asks him about his foster parent visit, and Eugene genuinely enjoyed it. And then Wit assures him that he's not alone in this search, and he's there for Eugene, and he'll do whatever he can to help him. And it's very nice of Wit. He literally says that he'll fly across the world to help him track down his father, and whoa, okay, that's extremely generous of you, Wit. So... And then he's like, well, you want to go work on this holograph device? Because I just closed up, and I still have some energy. So Eugene's like, okay. But then Eugene starts relating to Wit his lessons he learned, and how God provided for him. Because when he was young, God gave him his father. And when he was a little older, God gave him the Burnetts. And when he was when it was time for Eugene to become a man, God gave him Wit. And it's a very sweet moment, and Wit's like, oh, well, I just want you to know that you'll never be alone. God's always with you. And then the scene goes out with them working on the holograph. And then we go to a great scene. Very short, but still a good scene. Although, if they're trying to hide who it is, they don't do a good job. So, basically, it's presumably in a homeless shelter. I always thought of it as a homeless shelter. And so this guy's being interviewed, okay, so tell us a bit about yourself. He's like, what's your name? And the guy's like, my name isn't important. But then he tells him everything else about himself. Like, why wouldn't you just come up with like a fake name? Oh, okay, whatever. So he's like, my name isn't important. He's like, okay, well, where are you from? He's like, Africa. I was held hostage for 20 years at an archaeological dig. And the man's like, oh, okay, you don't have to tell me. But like, why would you... It's Leonard, by the way. I knew it all along. It was always Leonard. The thing is, why would Leonard tell him all that information but not convey like even a fake name? Like, why not say, my name is Mark, or my name's like Robert, or like, what? Okay. But like, just, he tells him everything else. And then the man asks if he has a family. He's like, I have no family. My wife died in Africa and I have no kids. And the man's like, well, okay, you're in our homeless shelter. I look forward to getting to meet you. And Leonard's like, me too. And he has like a hint of an English accent, which I love in this episode. And it's also important to note that this is the first episode which Leonard Meltsner has appeared in. So that's kind of cool. Then we get the Chris wrap-up. And the Bible verse is Philippians 4:19. And basically it's about how God cares about us. And I've noted it's a decent wrap-up. God gives us what we need when we need it, which very true. So, yeah, this podcast is a little longer, but that's okay. I kind of wanted a longer podcast this time. And yeah, it was a good episode. I enjoyed it, even though it had some blunt bloopers in it, but oh well. It was a very good episode. Not the promo. The promo was very weird, but the episode was good. So anyway, I think that's all I have for this episode. So I will be back next week to discuss episode 594, A Time for Action Part 1. So bye guys, and have an amazing week. I'll see you next time.